Welcome to Attican Plays Railway Empire. All right, this is Attican and welcome to another Railway Empire video. We're going to do the Viva Mexico scenario that came out in the new DLC that was just released, the Mexico DLC. And we're going to be playing as Roger because that's our only option. And I'll just give you one heads up looking in the future. This is an excellent scenario. Really well done. Great map. Really fun to play. And this one thing you're seeing me do here is adjust the sound. For whatever reason, I keep adjusting it. And when I come back in later, it seems to go back where it was. I'm not sure why. But anyway, I'm moving the sound up because this is almost like a campaign mission. And wanted to hear their little speeches.
But soon you can call me Mr. President. Welcome to Mexico. Our situation is dramatic, but not without hope. People are doing worse than 50 years ago, and we are struggling for political unity and governance ever since. However, I am positive that our current president will soon become reasonable and cede office to me. As soon as my strong hands get grasp of this power, Mexico will shine in new splendor.
So we have two early tasks. One is to connect Veracruz to Mexico City.
The foundation of Mexico's future. The political leadership missed the opportunity to bring the railroads to Mexico. Now this is over. A railroad from Veracruz to our capital will open the Atlantic gates to our economy. Let's do this.
Okay, I'm beginning to remember why I had them muted in the first place. Anyway.
Excellent. Now, even our capital should experience an increase in prosperity.
Okay, so there's one task down. Now we have to grow Mexico City and build an economy that works. So we're going to do our standard connection with point-to-point connections and run some automatic trains between Mexico City and Veracruz because we've got, sure enough, a beer meat line. Just what we want. And I'll tell you that I had opened up this scenario 2 or 3 times and just started it. Not to cheat, but just to try different things. I wanted to see if we could maybe do something a little bit different because I keep kind of doing the rapid expansion strategy that we've kind of landed on as our kind of default way to play. And after trying multiple things, circles, loops, actually, you know, having double track connections with the diamond intersection and having the ability to go through a station to another station, all that stuff. I did all that kind of stuff. And honestly, this right here, the point-to-point, the way we started out, it's the way to play this game. What I've decided is that while there certainly are railroad-based games where you would build a different kind of a network, perhaps some would argue a more realistic looking network, this game, because of its mechanics, wants you to play like this. Let me put it a different way. If you want to do well, you want to play like this. That's what I should say. And there are other ways to do. There are other options, of course. There are other, smart people are going to come up with all kinds of different ways to get the job done. But what we've seen is that this rapid expansion early to get an economic footprint, running these automatic lines on beer meat lines, that's the way you really get your economy rocking and rolling up front, and build a baseline that you can grow and adjust to whatever you need to do to hit your objective. So, like in this case, while we're expanding, we need to be cognizant that Mexico City needs to grow, and it needs to grow rapidly for us to do well. So we've got meat over here in Oaxaca, and we've got more beer over here in, I've forgotten how to say it. It starts with a T. I think it's an Aztec name. I'm not sure, but definitely a hard one for me to pronounce. I'll have to get a look at it on the screen to actually even give it a go. But anyway, we've got a second beer meat line we can set up here. And that's what we're up to. And avoiding the temptation of sharing the track. As I said, I did some experimentation with a lot of the track sharing. Really, a lot of it driven by the fact I wanted to use all the neat new intersections we have and all the merges and the crossovers and all that stuff. And while all that stuff is really cool, you you kind of get in a mess in a hurry with trying to do too much with trunk lines and merges and stuff. Dedicated lines really do work best. We're also following our strategy of starting with small stations, adding a station or an expansion depending on which direction we're coming in as we need them. And the whole point there is, someone would be tempted to say, well, you're going to need a bigger station. Why don't you just build it up front? But the money that you spend in this game or any game, or for that matter in life, I guess, it's not just how much do you spend, but when do you spend it? And so by doing it this way, by building the small stations and minimizing our initial expense to get these lines set up, we can start that revenue coming in more quickly. And as that revenue comes in, then we can expand. But if we tried to just say, well, like here at Mexico City, we know we're going to need a lot of terminals. Why wouldn't we just put a large in right away? Because here I'm expanding it already. Why didn't I just do that to start with? Because that would be money I couldn't have spent. I would be waiting potentially to put another train on a line or even to build the line itself. So you want to spend your money as frugally as possible up front. And then you want to drive to an economy that's so strong that you can't spend it as fast as you can make it. That's where you're trying to go. And when you get to that point, then you got options. Then you can do what you like. You can build in whatever kind of land track you like. You can put in large stations right off the bat. You can build bridges and tunnels and whatever you like to do. But you need the funds. And you can see we're already, and I'm double checking to make sure, we're already totally in debt. We've already maxed out our bonds. But also remember, our common theme is debt is your friend. You don't be afraid to open those bonds and get more money. You'll also notice that while we want to be frugal, you'll probably also notice that we spend the money as fast as we can make it. So in other words, as soon as we are able to lay down that track and put in some supply towers and throw some trains out there, we do it. We don't sit around waiting and watching our money accumulate unless it's a specific case where we have like okay, I know there's an industry opening about to come. The city's about to hit 40,000. I know I can put a textile industry in there. I really want to do that. Then maybe you wait and hang on and make sure you got $400,000 so you can afford that. But generally speaking, you want to spend the money as fast as you can to build your economy so that you're making more and more money. Hanging on to money does not help you in this. Rarely does holding your money help you in this game. And here we're using that technique of the back-to-back stations so that we can start bringing in goods into Mexico City from here from the south, and we need more terminals for that, so we need another station. Now, I know some of you get upset when I hit fast forward, so okay, I won't. I promise you I will not hit fast forward. We're going to watch this thing in its entirety, but I will say this. I don't have that much to say. I'm about out of things to say about Railway Empire until we get to something, a little more interesting in what goes on. Now, there's a lot of interesting things that are going to come up. Sorry, I try not to speak in the future when I'm doing these voiceovers, but there will be some cool stuff come up, and I'll definitely talk about that. But as far as, how do you do a rapid expansion? How do you do set up your stations? How do you expand? How do you bring goods in? How do you close off lines? How does the freight work? How do the passengers work? Why automatic lines? All that good stuff. We've talked about all that stuff in multiple videos. And if this is all Greek to you, I would really encourage you to watch the Track Layout 101 and watch some of the warehouse series, like the Ideal Two-City Cluster one. And then there's one called Rapid Expansion Strategy and the Pass-Through Warehouse. Definitely encourage you to watch that one to get the fundamentals of how to play the game, at least the way I see the game. And it seems to work. It certainly works for me, and I think it's worked for a bunch of other people as well. So if you're new to the game and you're wondering, why do you do that? Why do you do that? I will explain certain things that are kind of new or interesting here, but we've talked about a lot of this a lot. So I guess what I'm saying is I'm going to spend a lot of time talking here to tell you that I'm not going to talk that much. I'm going to kind of watch myself play here a little bit right along with you. And since we're not allowed to fast forward, we'll watch every bit of it, and I think that's probably good. But I'm definitely not going to try to have a running commentary the whole time. I'm not Stephen A. Smith. I can't rattle on for 10 minutes about nothing at the drop of a hat. Well, actually, I probably could, but I don't want to. All right, so enjoy, and I'm going to shut up for a little while. I will say this. What I'm doing right now is focusing on getting goods into Mexico City, and you might say, well, no, you're sending something to that city above Mexico City. That's because this city right here, San Luis Potosi, I think it is giving us beer. And I want to make sure that the wheat supply is coming to that beer so that beer supply is steady into Mexico City. So that's why sometimes you have to look, if you want to grow one city, sometimes you have to think about it's the cities there where it has a symbiotic relationship, and you may have to build those as well. And what I mean by that is because this is one of the beer suppliers for Mexico City, we wanted to absolutely have a steady supply of beer, so Mexico City gets a steady supply of beer. Okay, that was simple enough. So I will say too, the research, I didn't have any strategy here in particular. I mostly tended to go for the one thing I would say is I didn't worry about trains so much early on. I like these two new trains that they've got. With the expansion, they were just fine. And one's a freight train, and a little down the road there's a full out and out express train. But we're basically hauling freight here everywhere we go. All these lines, even with the ones with the automatic with that don't have passengers and mail, they're really freight lines. Everything's a freight line because we're trying to grow cities. So didn't look at research for trains, but did go for any kind of mail revenue, more passengers, more passenger revenue, that kind of thing. So here's an example of that. We're in that kind of the second phase or step of our rapid expansion strategy. First one is you go out and connect 4 or 5 cities. You start the automatic lines between them, and then you start we call it the wheat cattle phase, where we run wheat to all the beer producers and cattle to all the meat producers, so that we keep a steady supply of meat and beer in our system, and that way it goes out to all the consumers out there who need it, and we make sure that that particular need is met by all our cities. That allows everything in our little network to grow, so all the cities are able to do early city growth because of that. And then that means that all the lines that run between the cities are getting ever more freight and passengers and mail. So the profitability of the lines just keeps steadily growing as the cities keep steadily growing. Now this one was a little messed up. The orientation of the station was incorrect, and actually I think the orientation of the player's brain was a little messed up. I could have easily just expanded that station, and that would have been more in keeping with what we usually try to do. I'm talking about Veracruz there, where we had a station with the tracks coming down toward us away from the main building, and we've got that second platform or second station in there now actually turned the same way instead of using the back-to-back. And that's because I didn't have the good sense to go ahead and expand that initial station. So you basically kind of look at it and say, well, if I need to come from the south and that station is already having its tracks, opening up toward the south, so to speak, then I just expand and use one of those platforms. If I need to go, conversely, in the same setup, if I needed to come in from the north, I would create another station, and that way I've got platforms going up to the north that I can hook into. So again, part of the idea here is dedicated lines where we don't have a lot of various lines coming in and queuing up and waiting to try to get in the station. Because I think the one thing that we've discovered through a lot of play and a lot of testing is that the big thing about your ability to really move goods and move passengers and mail in this game is the turnaround in your station. And basically you get in this situation where the trains are all queued up and stopped, and they're not doing you a lick of good when they're out there not going anywhere. Okay, they're just they're really not very useful in that scenario. So one of the things that I will do is double up a line. If it's kind of a freight only deal, I will go through and create a go ahead and merge into a line and run freight, two or three of my freight lines into the same terminal. For one thing, there's only so many terminals. You only have 8 terminals max if you have 2 large stations. That's one. And 2, sometimes it's just convenient. It's just really the way the map lays out, the way the resources lay out. It's just very useful to have that extra resource out there. And what I'm doing here is trying to work through how to get that connection the way I want it. I have to confess, I'm not 100% on this the new mergers yet. I don't have all that worked out yet, and I need more practice. And it's getting better, certainly is. But you notice there, I just had to kind of go back and say, nah, I don't like that. I'm gonna have to come up with something different. There we go. Now that's better because now use the functionality to make the merge with the line, but still have this ability. Now I've got 2 lines coming back that are going to go back to my wheat farm so that I can have dedicated back and forth lines from the wheat into Mexico City. And here I goofed up and ran my dedicated line to the wrong platform, the one I was already using for the train that goes in the other direction. So I'm doing a little deletion and correction to try to make that line up correctly. And I also then inadvertently deleted too much track, but that's okay. Got it all rebuilt, and now it's all going into the correct platform so that we have a dedicated platform for Mexico City, another dedicated platform for Veracruz. The other thing I had to do on this one was kind of acquaint myself with the pecking order for these resources, because they change them a little bit each time, and now we've got this new map and we've got new resources. We've got coffee, we've got sugar. That's sugar right down there, right below where we're building. There's coffee up there a little north of Mexico City that we're going to deal with here in a little bit. But what does a city need right off the bat? So basically, it seems like coffee on this map has taken the place of corn. So you don't find corn, but you do find coffee, and it's one of the first things that cities want. So so I just kind of had to take a look to see, okay, what do I really need? And then of course logs are always a great one, and they're still, even on this map and in this scenario, logs are one of the top six, those first fundamental ones that cities need to grow. So making sure that we've got logs coming into Mexico City, and we've dealt with the wheat, and we've got the beer, and we've got the meat, and we've gotten the cattle going into Mexico City. So that actually, once we have logs going in, that'll take care of the big six, the first ones that they need. But to get up to the goal that we have, I think it's 55,000 or 55,000-ish. We're going to need more than that, but you absolutely, and any time you want to do city building, you want to get the big six, those first ones going in there. Now you'll notice too that Mexico City has expanded past 40,000 now. I just noticed that there's a textile industry now that has been placed in Mexico City, and that's lovely. That's a beautiful selection. At least the private owner didn't, put some, I don't know, a steel industry or something totally worthless in there that we couldn't possibly supply. But with that textiles, not only is it a good thing because we can supply it, there's cotton nearby, but also because those textiles are needed for Mexico City's growth earlier, and also for Veracruz and San Luis Potosi. And, so it's a great thing to help all our cities grow. Okay, so we're still kind of doing that cattle wheat phase, and I want to get wheat all the way out there to that city that starts with a T. So now we're going to have our first little interesting use of the new functionality with the crossing lines. So we drag it across and get a bridge, and then we just flatten it out until the marker is right over the track we're trying to cross, and that gives us a nice level track. So you can see now we've got a nice crossing going across that existing line, and we can run that up here to our wheat and start running that wheat down to the T-town, whatever. Let's just call it T-town. And that way T-town can grow, and T-town can help Oaxaca grow by shipping beer to Oaxaca. And I have experimented with this, and you'll notice I'm running a line back on this side, this kind of this northwest side of the intersection that we just created. And I'm not even trying to get another line to go across there. I've done a lot of experimenting. I think I may try it later again in this playthrough, but you can't put two crossover tracks side by side, so you don't get that neat 2 over 2 kind of look. You can't do it. You have to take one if you want to have the double crossing, then you have to give it some space. You have to kind of, it's almost like you're dealing with a double wide bridge, and you know how you have to kind of loop around it a little bit and give it some space. Same deal here. You have to give it some space. So here I'm just saying, okay, fine. I will run a line up right up to that intersection, and then I will run another line on the other side right up to it from the other direction, and that'll be, and we'll just have a single crossover, and we'll have that one little piece of track there that's a two-way track where trains are going to cross the line. And I do want to mention too, when I did the version 4 update video, I put those signals really close to those intersections, and a couple of you asked me about that. Do you really need it, or are you creating a situation where a train could go partway across and stop? And I commented that, well, for one thing, you do want a signal that will free up that intersection as quickly as possible. So you want a train to pass past a signal so that it opens up and says, hey, we're no longer using this block we just left. However, after playing with it some more, you don't really have to do much more than, just make sure you've got signals coming from every direction and past in every direction, and it's perfectly okay to have them a full train length away from the intersection. Works just fine. You would have to have extremely heavy traffic for that to cause a bottleneck, and frankly, if you had that heavy a traffic, I would question your design, because you've created a bottleneck. And by having too much traffic, no matter how good, if you think about where you live, no matter how good your road is, there's a circumstance where that road will be gridlocked. And it's the same thing with this. If we try to put too many trains in too small a space, it just won't work. And the challenge we have is to figure out a way to have an alternate route for those trains if we truly need all those trains, or ask ourselves, do we truly need all those trains? But at any rate, there is a good example of using the crossover effectively. We were able to make a direct connection from our wheat over to the T-town, and without a lot of hassle and without building a bunch of bridges and tunnels. So cool. And Mexico City's growing nicely for us. Very high satisfaction. It's just about to hit its number. So we're about to finish the first little phase of tasks there.
Very well. To help Mexico up to its feet, we will need all our resources. But it will not be manageable without international commercial relationships. Our friends in Europe have developed a fine taste for Mexican coffee. Take care that the coffee arrives in Veracruz. That will ensure gratitude to me from our friends overseas. Their support will finally help me to obtain power here in Mexico.
Okay, so let's wrap up episode 1 right here. We have accomplished our first 2 tasks, hooked up to Mexico City and grown Mexico City to a decent size, 55,000. We've also, if you notice, haven't stopped there. We've expanded our footprint, expanded out so that we've got a nice network. We have 5 cities connected in. We've got beer meat lines running, and we've got our wheat and cattle feeding those beer meat lines. Got some extra goods going into Mexico City to help it grow. We've done our first fancy crossing intersection, and we've used the merge functionality as well. So let's cut off right there, and we'll come back in episode 2, and we'll start dealing with getting that coffee down to Veracruz. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope it'll help you become a better player, and I hope you'll join us for our next Railway Empire video. Thank you.